The legendary cross-continental clash includes 16 of the best players, but they're allowed to change their decks week to week now in this tournament. It's a double elimination bracket. You're locked in with the ink colors you first selected. I have my game tomorrow up against Kurt Spice. I'm still in the winners bracket. So double elimination bracket means if you lose twice, you're out of the tournament. We're going to look through all of the matchups, starting with the winners bracket and starting off with Zach Bivens versus Zan Syed, which is a really exciting one. A big shout out to Card Market, as usual, who sponsor the channel. Really interesting to get a little bit of a read on the meta based on some of the best selling cards this week. Zach Bivens is the only player playing Amber Steel. He's really representing this color combination, and he won his first game of the tournament. And I think this is really fascinating to look at because it's changed ever so slightly. The main thing that's changed is there's a copy now of Cinderella Stout-Hearted in there, which I don't believe was in there before. Also a copy of I Find 'em, I Flatten 'em. I Find 'em, I Flatten 'em is an interesting metacal because it banishes all the items at once, which includes your own. Zach does not play any, so it's just going to be dealing with those Sapphire items. Obviously, it can be sung by the Troubadour, it can be sung by Ursula and Ariel, all cards which only quest for one, even Miss Bianca as well. So you're not going to lose out on too much tempo doing that. He's also playing 4 copies of Zeus, which I believe is up from 3 copies in the previous week, as well as adding in 1 copy of Ursula Vanessa. He went for the Troubadour, and now he's got 1 copy of Vanessa in. The rest of the deck is pretty much the same, just changing the ratios of a few of the cards, going with the Neverland location, which is really, really fascinating. It makes me wonder if in my Amethyst list, I should have been looking a little bit more carefully at the option of fairy ships, because these locations are really good against the steel decks, which are seemingly everywhere. You know, if you've got Let the Storm Rage On being sung by Bell and Strength of Raging Fire being sung by Bell, and Neverland is a perfect response potentially to those kinds of cards. One of the most interesting things about Zach's list is the fact that there was this narrative about, is the Troubadour better? Is Ursula better? I remember when I first saw this card, I was like, oh my god, it's better than Ursula Vanessa. And then everyone in my comments was like, oh my god, Specie, no, because the Ursula Vanessa can be healed by 3 with Rapunzel, but the Troubadour could only be healed by 2 by Rapunzel. And of course, the healing translates to card draw. But what Zach Bivens has pointed out is that the ally tag of the Troubadour here is really valuable because of this new card, Miss Bianca, who is a 6-cost card, but if you have an ally character in play, she only costs 4. And that gives you a great way of singing the whole new world without necessarily needing a shift. And in fact, this might be the first whole new world deck we've seen in Amber Steel for an incredibly long time, maybe ever, that isn't going for any shift lines. That is really, really fascinating. So not a single shift card in this deck apart from the now one of Cinderella, but she's not in there to sing a whole new world. Very, very cool. So Zach is going to be up against a very well-known player known as Zan Syed. Zan Syed winning his game up against Dinkan Fan, which I did cover on the channel. I was casting with Moyen. I had some audio issues. Sorry about that. It is on my end. My PC's got some issues I'm looking to address. Zan has stuck strong with Oswald, which is really, really cool because he's been called out a little bit for his Oswald build and maybe the Hyper Bowl in which he marketed it with. So I'm not surprised to see Zan sticking strong with it and looking to prove some doubters wrong, because with this kind of narrative that's coming into this event about the Oswald deck, you know, even myself, I called him out on it. I think if Zan would be able to come through into this tournament and win it with sticking strong with Oswald, that would probably have to silence a lot of the critics. And Zan's sticking with Oswald. Oswald was really explosive in the round 1 match up against Dinkan Fam's Ruby Sapphire. But you have to ask the question, how is it going to perform against the Amber Steel setup of Zan? Obviously, Zan has lots of ways of removing it with things like the Storm and the Strength. But moreover, how is Amber Steel for Zach going to match up into the Bell? We know that Cinderella, Ballroom Sensation, has been the de facto way of singing Storm and Strength in the early game. Diablo also a competitor in that sense, but Cinderella's always been the go-to. But now you've got Belle, and Belle is strictly a better, less consistent way of doing that. I say she's less consistent because Cinderella just requires Cinderella and the song, whereas Belle requires the item, the bell, and the song as well. But if you can match and get all those pieces together, Belle's stat line is significantly higher. With a 3-3 stat line, Cinderella with just that 2 willpower, it does mean she can be taken out by Let the Storm Rage On. So this is a match I'm really keen to check out and see how it plays out. Certainly Sapphire Steel is the flavour of the month, and it will be really interesting to see if Zach on Amber Steel can compete with him. The next matchup is mine. These are two of the more unique decks. I wanted to start off with kind of the more unique decks before we get onto the onslaught of Sapphire. And I'm playing up against Kurt Spice in the round 2 of the winners bracket, who is playing Emerald Steel. And Kurt has also made a few changes to their list. I know that there was a couple copies of Benja in the previous list, which is no longer there. And overall, I've actually already been testing against this deck, and I have to say I'm pretty impressed. You've got a bit of a decision in these decks whether you go for Doc or Beast. You've got very, very tight lists, and if you watch my meta report video from the weekend, I looked at a lot of Emerald Steel lists, and I was maybe a little bit critical of people cutting down the copies of Hypnotize and the copies of Bruno. And what ends up happening is you just don't end up having that much discard. Well, Kurt has not sacrificed any of those. He's got his 4 Hypnotize, his 4 Bruno, and his 4 Sudden Chill. Worth noting that Bruno can now be sung by Pete Space Pirate. When you went in the previous set for a Doc build over Beast, it kind of made the Bruno feel a little bit more awkward because you didn't have any way of singing the card, and it would have to be hard cast. And while it might still be necessary, it was a little bit more difficult to justify. But now Pete Space Pirate is a perfect way of potentially singing Bruno, as well as 2 copies of Cricky. And I have to say, Cricky, unbelievably good card. It still is probably got to be up there as one of the most underrated cards in the game. Its stat line is obscene. I've started playing it in my Emerald Sapphire decks, questing for 3 as an Inkable with those stats that is also giving +3 strength to everything when you play it is phenomenal. Top class card. And the Cricky is going to be particularly strong against locations, which you're going to be expecting to see a lot of Scrooge McDuck Manners with that 9 willpower. So Cricky's really aimed at that. 2 copies of the Muses is definitely something which I'm happy to see with the deck that I'm playing up against him, because the Muses can be absolutely devastating against me. Worth noting with this deck overall, again, I've been testing against it quite extensively already. The Diablo is the only 1-drop, so it does lack that little bit of consistency, and it is still that kind of high roll potential deck that we're used to seeing when it comes to Emerald Steel. But in a meta where people aren't really teched for Diablo, Diablo can be unbelievably strong. Really, really good deck. I really like the build, I have to say. You guys know me, I'm not easily impressed when it comes to deck builds, but this to me looks very, very clean. I think the only thing is maybe that 3rd Muses, but to be fair, in the overall meta that's in this tournament as well, because bear in mind, coming into this, I knew all of my potential 7 opponents into this round, and I knew, that it was mainly Sapphire Steel. You've got a pretty good idea, so you can somewhat tech your deck for the tournament meta. And here's what I'm playing. I've actually tested the deck now compared to when I previously submitted it, which is really interesting. And the big changes, obviously, I've made from the last round is I finally got my Maleficent biding her time in the building. I'm never going to cut her again from this list. She's absolutely crucial, just being able to go under things and race. But 2 other new additions, which is 2 copies of Fire the Cannons, which obviously coming up against the Diablo deck is looking like a bit of an inspired choice. Again, I did know coming into this there was a 1 in 7 chance that I could queue into Emerald Steel, so maybe that played a factor. I was also just eyeing up some of the other decks, like I was looking at Artabax and LD's list, and they had like a 1-cost Captain Hook, and I was thinking, wouldn't it be nice to go Maleficent on turn 1 into another Maleficent on turn 2 plus a Fire the Cannons? Could give me a really good edge. Similarly, Fire the Cannons onto a Tipo if I'm playing against Moyen or something like that, to just remove his only way of challenging my characters in the early game. The Fire the Cannons can be absolutely extraordinarily high tempo. I almost went up to 3, in fact, before I submitted my list, and now I'm up against Kurt. I can tell you for sure I'm going to be looking for those Fire the Cannons in my mulligan. The other thing I've added into the deck is 3 copies of Doc, and I didn't think I would ever want to go to play Amethyst Chromacon and Doc in the same deck, but the reality of it is that with the Doc, You've just got that consistency of almost always finding some way of refilling your hand. Some issues that I was running into with this deck previously was I wouldn't want to keep the Amethyst Chromacon in my opening hand because I want to mulligan aggressively and find a very, very low curve. What you'll see me do very often with this deck is just have a ton of 1-drops out, and then on turn 3 play like a Smee and a 1-drop, get a very wide board. Keeping a Chromacon therefore in hand didn't really feel that clean, but I would often end up in situations where I would run out of cards in hand. I wouldn't find the Chromacon at the right time. And the dock is just in there because it gives me an alternative way of dumping and refilling my hand very, very efficiently. Playing 3 could have gone to 4, but 3 feels like the right number, to be fair. I went down to 3 Benjers as well, which honestly I don't love. And then the White Rose ended up going. Why did I get rid of the White Rose and not some of the other cards? Well, this deck has a ton of the story cards, which formerly known as Burn, gain lore. And the White Rose to me was, well, it is actually just the least efficient one. If you look at it, you've got Gathering Knowledge and Wisdom, which gains 2 for 2. You've got the White Rose, which gains 1 for 3. The Giant Cobra gains 2 for 3 if you have enough cards in hand. Goat is gaining at least 2, if not more. Honey Maron, therefore, is the closest comparison to the White Rose. And the Honey Maron, while not guaranteed, it pretty much is. You're always gaining 1 lore of Honey Maron for 2. If you're not, you're going to incur, and she's just way more efficient, right? I can play 3 Honey Marons for the same cost that I can play 2 White Rose. White Rose, therefore, is not necessarily a worse card than Honey Maron, because if you're playing a deck with songs like Strength of a Raging Fire and Friends, the White Rose is a lot more compelling. But in my list, where it's all about just trying to cross the finish line, having a card which can gain lore more efficiently like Honey Maron makes it a much more appealing choice. Honestly, my matchup against Kurt is going to be fascinating. It is going to be a really, really interesting game of Disney Lorcana, where his discard game plan is going to be counteracted somewhat by my Amethyst Chromacon. But then the big question is who can get to 21st? It's going to be a race. It's going to be a really fun one. I'm looking forward to it. Having tested it, Kurt has the edge, but I think if things go my way, if I win the die roll, I've got a good shot. And I'm really hoping I can keep going forward in this competition because it's a lot of fun. Up next, we've got LD, Lorcana deck lists. And I was a little bit critical of his and Artabax's list coming into the last week because I like the idea of it, but I wasn't quite sure I was in love with the execution. Well, I have to say that has completely changed. And one thing that is making me really excited about this deck list is that LD has submitted a deck with no copies of Tamatoa. Now, that is fascinating because suddenly this deck just became a whole lot cheaper, and it's a deck that I could even play myself. I don't have any copies of Tamatoa right now. I actually have 1. And I thought, could you really not play this deck without Tamatoa? Could you build a budget version of Sapphire Steel? And it turns out you can. And I thought you would lose like a lot of value, but I have been playtesting this one because I've been helping Moyen out in his practice. And I have to say, it feels very, very good. There is one glaring thing about this deck list, which I absolutely have to call out as being a complete nonsense. And that is the Mickey Mouse Playful Sorcerer. LD has submitted a similar list to Artabax. Those guys have a podcast together, which you guys should definitely check out. And Artabax has 3 copies of this Magic Brewman. So the Mickey Mouse at least makes a little bit of sense in his. But in LD's, not so much, if I'm honest. Some of you will know I've been playing this Mickey Mouse Playful Sorcerer in my Whole New World decks. And I think if you're playing a Whole New World, it makes some degree of sense. You don't play it because it's a good card. You play it because it's a good... You've got a really good shift target and it's a consistent shifter. But it's a very lackluster card. But that is where the lackluster cards really stop, I have to say. I think the rest of the deck is pretty inspired. And it starts off with the Mickey Mouse as the 1-drop. Of course, you could go for Mulan in this slot, but Mulan is going to get taken out in the mirrors by your opponent's Storm and Strength, whereas the Mickey Mouse is quite difficult to deal with. Having said that, if your opponent plays a Belle against you and you play a Mickey Mouse, that doesn't feel too good. But Mickey Mouse is a hero, and Anna here is if you have another hero character in play, this character gets +1. And this card, again, is great in mirror matchups. Smee is going to quest once, and it's going to have a damage counter, and it can be taken up by the Storm. That's not going to happen with Anna. She's going to be nicely protected. She's pretty good in this deck because you have a ton of heroes. You have the Mickey on 1. You have the Belle on 1, and you have the Alice on 3. So you've got a ton of heroes that you're going to play on curve to enable this Ana to really, really pop off. You've also got Doc in there, and Doc feels great. I have to say, Doc over the Tamatoa essentially just gives this deck like that little bit of extra oomph as an aggro game plan. And the fact that this deck is playing Doc and not Tamatoa, and like I said, when I tested it, I liked it. I am definitely going to be using this as a shell of inspiration for the Sapphire Steel deck that I'm going to be bringing you guys, which will be a Tamatoa-less version. I imagine it will look very similar to this list that LD is playing, because Alice Savage Sailor's in there. Many of you that have been watching my videos will know I've been saying, where is the Alice in these decks? I think this card is absolutely extraordinary. So what LD is doing here is they're not playing any ramp on turn 2. They're just playing a curve of 1, 2, 3. They're not going 1, 2, 4. Just 1, 2, 3. Good, honest Lorcana gameplay. You're going to be looking to probably go for Doc as early as possible rather than the Hiram. But Hiram's there as your backup option if you don't have access to Doc, or you've got a little bit of a slower game. You've got Benja for some mirrors. Pete, of course, is great. And the Pluto Guard Dog, worth noting, you can give ward to it with Alice, which turns it into a really difficult card to contend with. And I have to say, I love Baymax Armored Companion. The only thing I'm sad about is that there's only 2 of them. I would love to have seen this Mickey Mouse be a third. It's tremendous. It gives you like a really big burst of lore. The Cogsworth is also great in the mirror matchups with Ward, Free McDuck Manners. I have to say, LD, I like it a lot. I really, really do. I'm hard to impress, guys. And speaking of decks that I do like a lot, this is my favorite version of Sapphire Steel from last week. I have to say, it's not anymore. I like the versions of Alice, and I think I even said that in last week's video. There just weren't any last week. But this is Moyen's list, obviously good friend of the channel. He is going to be up against LD, and it's going to be a really, really fascinating matchup between these two. Have been helping him practice for it, and I can tell you, whoever goes first in that one is going to have a pretty big advantage. Moyen's list, I'm not sure if it's exactly identical, but it's near identical. I have a feeling he might have dropped a Pete and squeezed in something else extra, but it's pretty much exactly the same. I think there's a couple of differences, but a big thing that Moyen's deck does, which the other decks don't, is it ramps, right? So the longer the deck gets going, the more pressure it applies. But then therefore that you can see why it's quite a coin flippy matchup between these two. If LD goes first and they can develop a aggressive board, Moyen might just not be able to catch up in time. But then when Moyen's going first, he's just got that little bit of extra legwork. He can get a Tamatoa down into questing and a Lucky Dimes on the board, and the game's over before you know it. Up next in the winners bracket, this is the last game in the winners bracket. We've got Federico from Italy, who is on Ruby and Sapphire, the only Ruby Sapphire player in the top 8, or the winners bracket. Because of course the players in the losers bracket can still win the tournament. Of course they can. And this one is on Little Sisu. It's on Maui times 3 2 Medusas. We've got 2 Tamatoas, 1 Hideaway, 3 Pirate Scythe, 4 Coils. Quite a lot of Ruby Sapphire players in the losers bracket, so we're going to be taking a bit more of a look at those in just a bit. But still sticking strong with the half shark setup and just a lot of different options, as well as the 4 Coils in this one. Artabax is going to be Federico's opponent, and Artabax pretty similar list to LD, but it's actually not even that similar, is it? It's actually very different. So I have to say, LD, he's got my favorite Sapphire Steel list out there so far. Artabax has also got a relatively quick build that isn't ramping, but it's not playing Doc, it's playing Tamatoa. And I have to say, I like the look of LD's list. I really do. I really do like it. Not to say that Artabax isn't good. I was a bit critical of it, actually, in the previous video. And it's really fascinating because what Artabax is kind of doing is he's kind of you've got the Moyen build. You've got 4 different builds here. It's crazy. You've got the Oswald build of Zan, which is like the high roller build, right? Then you've got the sensible build that's Moyen's, which is ramping. Then you've got this, which is kind of like doing a little bit of everything. It's not ramping, but it's still playing Tamatoa and Flavisham as its card draw tool. And then you've got LD on the full aggro mode with the Docs and the Alice. Unsurprisingly, you guys know me. I like aggro, so that's possibly why I'm more inclined but to see the LD version of them all. But Artabax is kind of just sat in between Moyen and LD with like a little bit of an aggro game plan with no ramp. I'm not sure. I personally have a feeling it might be better to go one way or the other. But if anyone can kind of sit in between those two and find the right mix, it's Artabax. So very strong player. I was hanging out with him at the weekend. Absolutely lovely chap as well. And very, very interested to see how this one comes up. It will be his second match actually against Ruby Sapphire. He beat Ed in round 1, where his copies of Zeus were really, really big against Ed's Scars. And those Zeuses, again, might be really impactful dealing with the Half Shark, dealing with the Tamatoa as well. Worth noting, there's no lucky dime in this list for Federico either. 2 B preps. B preps very, very strong. Also, there's 3 big Sisus. And if you look at Artabax's deck, you would have to say that the Sisu isn't looking that spectacular unless he can really get the coils going. Onto the losers bracket, and Domingo's up next, and he called this list. He submitted it. You can't see the deck names people submitted, but he called it Not Mill. We saw Domingo, the European champion, playing a Mill Ruby Amethyst deck, and it was quite something to behold, almost getting the win. I'm not sure if you guys saw it, but in game 1, he actually managed to deck out his opponent, but your opponent, you have to draw to lose, and his opponent LD gained 2 lore from the mana, got to 20, never had to draw from his empty deck, so won that way. It was unbelievable. But what has Domingo gone for? Because obviously he's locked in with Ruby Amethyst, and I think we all know that Ruby Amethyst is not looking spectacular. And he's gone for a deck with locations. Ferry Ships and Forbidden Mountain. Forbidden Mountain is a great YouTube channel, but not a great card. Big shout out to my friends at the Forbidden Mountain. So it's interesting to see that. Obviously, you could go for Queen's Castle if you want something a little bit more expensive, but you want something cheaper. But locations can definitely have a place. I'm not too convinced by this one, but I'm interested to see if Domingo can make it work. I think Ruby Amethyst is in a bit of a tricky spot at the moment. But yeah, it'll be interesting. No Flynn. Obviously, Flynn's not great this meta. I think Ruby Amethyst needs a bit of a rethink. We'll see though. Sailor, who is the player that I just about scraped past, he is up against Domingo. So obviously Ruby Amethyst, often a tricky matchup for Ruby Sapphire, and Domingo's deck it's got the libraries and stuff, but it just doesn't have that big like that Tremaine threat. It doesn't have that 4B preps. It's only on 3. So Sailor's deck, I think, just might be able to outgreed it. He doesn't have to worry about the Flynn Rider either. It'll be an interesting one to see, but I would predict Sailor comes out on top. I really should do a prediction for all of these, shouldn't I? So I'm going to predict... I actually have no idea. I'm going to predict Zach to win. I don't know how Amber Steel does into this, but I'm going to predict Zach. I'm going to predict myself to win because you've got to, haven't you? I'm going to predict whoever wins the coin flip to win this one, which is a bit of a cop-out. But I'll predict Moyen for the record. And this one, I'm going to predict... I'm going to predict Federico to win it. I think Artemax might be a little too slow, but I could be very wrong on that. Anyway, on to the rest of the decks. We've got Theatim, who is a Digital Lorcana Challenge winner, and he's playing pretty much card for card Moyen's list. You can see Moyen's now on 3 Peats. He was on 4 before, I believe. That's one of the changes. Moyen's on no copies of McDuck Manor, and Theatim is on 2. But again, in the deck submission, he did call it like Moyen, basically. So very heavily inspired by Moyen's on the 2 Zeus as well. Theatim, great player, and he's up against Mo Shamblin, who has the best name in the competition and is playing the best ink color combination, my favorite, which is Sapphire and Emerald. Now, Mo had a tough time in round 1 up against a Ruby Sapphire deck. I was watching it quite keenly to see how the Ink Gazer performed. Not well, is the honest assessment. I was traveling when I watched it, so I wasn't watching it like with massive focus. But from what I saw of it, I was kind of unconvinced by the Ink Gazer setup. I am still a big believer in Bend to My Will as the real build around card build around card of Emerald Sapphire. I very nearly submitted Emerald Sapphire myself. Very, very challenging deck to build. I would say it's probably the hardest deck to build in the game, which is perhaps why I'm so drawn to it. And I'm really, really wishing Mo well. Like I'm definitely excited to watch this deck in action again and see if the Inkgazer can do anything. If ever there's a meta for it, it is now. And yeah, Theatim does do some ramping stuff, so there's definitely a chance that this deck could perform really well. Flavisham's in there now. I don't know if Flavisham was in there before. Flavisham's in there with Porpsicle, with Sapphire Coil. Muses it in there with You're Welcome and Mother Knows Best. Like, it's honestly very close in this form to my Bend to My Will decks. It's playing Heffalumps. It's really not that many cards difference. The main difference is that I'm on a lot more Bends and no Inkgazers. But it's not a million miles away if you actually really analyze it quite closely. We've now got Diego level 9 at 1000, Saz, who is the only player playing Amber and Emerald, and he's also tweaked his deck a little bit as well. He's still stuck strong with the Prince here. He's got some Crickeys in there, but no sign of the 3-cost dock, which allows you to Crickey on 4, which I'm personally a big fan of. He has got the Lady and he has got the Tramp combo. I actually like the decision to go down to just 3 copies of this Lady card because it can be quite janky. I believe they also might have been on Merfolk previously, but that has been cut. But they are sticking strong with the Inkable Piglet. As an aggro tool, they have the Prince. They have 2 Ladies, 2 Churner Boys, 4 Tramps. It looks like a solid build, I have to say. I think a trap you can fall into with this deck is you build it too aggressively. And I think removing that Merfolk. Piglet is inkable, right? And you still got those 4 Go-Go's. Yzma's also an interesting one. When you play this character, you may draw a card, then choose and discard a card. Very underwhelming, but it can help you get rid of some uninkables while also populating your discard for Lady and Chernobog. They're going to be up against Ed. And Ed, who is, on record, in my opinion, the best Disney Lorcana player there is right now, because they won the North American Championships and they won a Disney Lorcana Challenge. But Ed's going to have a tough time. Ed was playing a build with 4 scars in the last round, and in his pre-match interview he kind of just said, yeah, I kind of underestimated how good those And Then Along Came Zeus's would be onto my scars, and therefore he's mixed it up, and suddenly I imagine he's wishing he had those scars in this matchup. He's up against an aggro deck playing a Ruby Sapphire deck. He does have 3 little Sisus though, and he does have 4 big Sisus, so it's actually a be prepared-less Ruby Sapphire. And what I like about Ed's decks is they're often just playing 4 copies of everything. A man after my own heart. It's also how I tend to like to build my deck. If you look at mine, not exactly. I've kind of strayed from that, but I do like, you know, this just appeals to me. Having said that, Ruby Sapphire, often you will see have lots of one-offs and things like that because of the Half Shark. But Ed has completely forgone the Half Shark. Not playing it. Very interesting. I do think that is going to be something that we start to see more people do, and perhaps a big part of that is because of those And Then Along Came Zeus's being very strong cards in Sapphire Steel, which is probably this deck's most important matchup to try and tech for in terms of meta share. Into the last one, we've got Brian the Rat, Cortada, and this game has actually already happened, and I have to say, I like the look of this one as well. You guys know me. If it's got Gantu, Captain Crankyhead in the deck, I'm probably going to like it quite a bit. This match has already happened. The Rat versus Ding Cam Fam. So spoiler warning. I'll reveal the result after we've looked at both decks, but spoiler warning for this one. Mulan, Honor, Doc. So basically going for Mulan over the Mickey, which is going to be good most of the time, but bad in mirrors potentially because of Belle being able to sing stuff to deal with Mulan. There's Lawrence in there, there's Alice, there's Smee, there's Pluto. There's only 2 Hirams. I like this one a lot with the Gantu. Like, you guys know me, I do love a bit of Gantu action, but I had to say I also love the setup that LD has there with the Baymax. Very, very similar decks. The big question is then, is this deck quick enough to beat Ding Kang Fam's Ruby Sapphire? And Ding Kang Fam is still on the Half Shark, he's still on the Super Goof. It's pretty much the same list we've seen from him in the previous sets. Last week, he played 1 Happy as a Clam and 2 Hideaway. He's now up to 3, happy as a clam. He was also only on 2 Hirams last week. He's now back up to 3. So he's added some consistency to his deck. He was kind of bemoaning the consistency of his list. And now, spoiler warning, this is your final warning. I'm going to reveal the result of this game. Dinkham Fam did come out on top in a 2-1 victory. I'm actually not sure who won the die roll on that one because I tuned in sort of halfway through the series, so apologies for that. I'm not sure who won the die roll. But yeah, those are all the decks. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Give it a like if you did. Thank you again to Card Market for sponsoring the video, and thank you very much to Pavel for organising this awesome tournament. I'm going to be up next up against Kurt Spice tomorrow, and I hope I can bring it home because that'd be cool. Thanks guys, I appreciate you, and see you.